I meet with founders every week, and we're seeing that founders right now are looking to hire designers before they're hiring PMs. Like, a designer is one of the first hires they're making.
What was so interesting to me, it was the only client who came to me when the market crashed and said, this is when you invest in design. This is when you work on your new products so that you're ready when the market picks up and you can take a lead position.
Hello, I'm Doug Powell. Welcome to This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. This episode is the second in a special two-part discussion with two design leaders, Kate Aronowitz of Google Ventures and Robert Fabricant of Dalberg. My discussion with them began in episode 1 of this season, and you might want to listen to that first if you haven't already, to give you some context and background for this episode. Here, in episode 2, we begin to dig more deeply into a pair of recent articles Robert Fabricant wrote for Fast Company, analyzing the current state of design leadership. The first of these articles, titled "The Big Design Freakout, A Generation of Design Leaders Grapple with Their Future," is a sobering assessment of an industry in the midst of a challenging economic cycle. The second article, titled "Design Leaders Are in Their Reinvention Era," paints a more hopeful picture with a focus on the emergence of grassroots communities of designers seeking connection, support, and guidance. We join our discussion as Robert tells us how the Fast Company articles originated.
It didn't start with a brief. So this kind of was different for me anyway, and I think it ended up being different for them in a sense that these kind of conversations with people who were either by choice or not starting to seek and think that either where they were or where they thought they were going to be next, all of it was a little more up in the air. And I just was getting a lot of inbound conversations. And I think because I sort of made a switch 10 years ago towards very, explicitly purpose-driven work, like I just made that change. And part of it is because I got into doing this work 5 or 10 years ahead of a lot of other people as well. So I had hit that point earlier, right? I think that was one of the reasons that maybe people reached out to just kind of understand, because it seemed like a very different path and not an obvious one. But anyway, the conversations were just kind of happening. And I was kind of reflecting on it. And when I reflect on things, I start to sort of assemble some themes and start to track a little bit in my mind, like kind of how these patterns are coming together, pattern making. It's kind of what we do visually, but it's also what I do narratively, I think. And so I didn't really think that there was a lot of reason that, Fast Company or somebody else would really want to cover conversations and kind of questions that design leaders were asking each other. And it wasn't until some of these platforms started to emerge that I thought maybe there's something newsworthy here. And so even though that's the second piece that came out, that's actually where it started a little bit.
And by platforms, you're referencing some of the forums and communities of design leaders that are beginning to galvanize.
Yeah, the different ways that design leaders were forming alliances, the different ways that some entrepreneurs, many designers were starting to build platforms to encourage that. The idea that there might be a fundamental shift in the model of design engagement that, kind of particularly post-COVID, both how we all could work together remotely, also kind of with some baseline design capacity kind of institutionalized in many companies. Maybe the end-to-end design project wasn't the container. Maybe even the idea of a product as a unit isn't the container for design anymore, with design systems, with so many other ways for products to get instantiated that don't necessarily require, like, let's start with every step of the journey and craft against it. So I think there were some changes happening there. And so for all those reasons, there was a growing appetite and interest and curiosity from designers to sort of like step back and think about different ways of both working and working together. And that's where these platforms emerged. And I thought that was what would make it a little interesting enough to a Fast Company because, they have their audience. They're tending to write about new stuff. And that was the new stuff. And so originally it started there. And then what happened is as I started to build it out and talk to more people, and for the first time, they kind of asked me to report, which is not my trade, but I was kind of like really trying to report and get people on the record, which I hadn't done a whole lot of before. It did snowball, and it started to feel like there was a story first. What started as one piece just kind of kind of kept sort of subdividing. It was to me, a little bit funny because the two pieces did bookend each other a little bit. So this one took a little bit longer to come out. And I do think it meant that the first piece was a very soul-searching piece and hit people kind of hard. I think it said things that most of the people who reached out to me afterwards felt very much resonated with their reality. So it definitely wasn't that people felt like it was mischaracterizing something in a doom and gloom way, but nonetheless, it kind of left people, feeling, I think, and capturing and kind of magnified a little bit that anxiety. And so the piece that came out now was meant to start just take the conversation forward, which is kind of what are new directions, where and how, not so much what is the renewed purpose for designers or design leadership, but more where and how might it emerge? How are we responding? And so that's kind of how we got into this kind of sort of second piece. And there, in and of itself, it's thrown off some conversations that seem to be leading to some follow-up stuff that I might write about. But it's the first time I'm writing a little bit more personally about design leadership or something like that, as opposed to just some of the same ideas and history that informed the book as well.
Yeah. And two articles, as you say, the kind of started with the second one, even though that was published after the first one. So that first article, I think, really, to your point, Robert, really hit a lot of people hard. I think it captured a lot of truth of the moment. The title of the article is "The Big Design Freakout: A Generation of Design Leaders Grapple with Their Future." Kate, how did this article resonate with you, and how did it hold up against the sort of the reality that you're operating in on a daily basis?
Yeah, I have to say, Robert, the morning that article came out, many shares going on. What did you read it? What do you think? And I love that you kind of poked at things and said some real truths that a lot of people were asking themselves. And I really appreciated the kind of setup. This is what's going on. And then I liked the reflection piece at the end. I thought that was like really tremendous. But I think what struck me about the article is I think there are a couple different truths going on right now. I think there are some chief design officer roles that have been eliminated. There are some executives that are out of work that are kind of, questioning kind of the direction of things. Where is their place? What is happening with these roles that they pioneered and worked so hard to get, and this feeling of making a difference at these organizations. And perhaps now that, design is not as relevant as it was. It's like, what do we do all this for? But at the same time, my day-to-day, I'm lucky enough to spend time with folks where I feel like design is thriving. So, we do a design stand-up twice a week. And at the top of the list of like, when we run through things is like all the companies that are hiring designers. And I just checked, and there are 9 of them right now. And a lot of them are very purpose-driven. They're in climate, they're in health tech, everything from that into fashion and supply chain. And like, you name it, you're nerdy into deep into security, or you want to do fashion, we've got it all. What I'm spending my time on, I meet with founders every week, and we're seeing that founders right now are looking to hire designers before they're hiring PMs. Like, a designer is one of the first hires they're making. And these are founders that get design. Like, they do have the phone. They understand that like a great business idea anymore does not succeed unless you know who your bullseye customer is and you deliver them a great product. And how do you do that? You do that with design. And these founders are bringing designers in at really critical moments. And so I'm very excited to know that the early stage companies right now are bringing in design pretty fast. And they're really empowering them. I was talking to one yesterday, and he's like, I go to the board meetings. He's like, I've never been asked to a board meeting before. He's so excited about it. And he's sitting next to the founder and helping them make really critical decisions. So there's that piece. And then there's this other community that I'm a part of design leaders at well-known companies that are all, is every day a dream and real easy for folks? No, but that's the reality of tech. And, the reality of design is that rarely a week goes by that you don't have to walk in and explain what you do and why you're in the room. Like I mentioned it, Netflix and Stripe and New York Times and Dropbox. Like, I talk to these designers all the time, and they're having real impact, not just on the product, but how the companies are run. So I don't want to declare design dead. I think that, and I don't think that that's what you were doing. I think we're better off than we were 10 years ago. And I think 10 years from now, we'll be better off than that. So I think it'd be interesting then dive in and see it from a different perspective of the folks that are in it right now, who are more optimistic, who are finding real success, and the founders who are pretty excited about the power of design. I mean, I run these design speaker series for all the designers or portfolio once a month, bring in people, and they just chit chat, and they're so helpful, and they're so excited. And you see designers now, they're in charge of technical writing, they're in charge of front end, they're doing all these things, and they have to flex in ways that we didn't have to sometimes. And so I'm very optimistic and encouraged by that piece.
Yeah, if I could jump in, and that's, first of all, great to hear. And I am not a pessimist myself. And there were a bunch of design is dead pieces. This was meant to more reflect a particular kind of generation of design leaders rather than design itself. But the two are easy. I mean, they have a lot of connection and correlation between the two. But I want to come back first to a story, which is when I was back at Frog in 2008, 2009, after the market crashed. I had one client come to me, and this was a client who worked deep in B2B, that was developing, kind of owned the market for these communication devices that sit on trading desks in Wall Street. And these things are very high performance tools. And we have been working with them already on trying to redesign some of the, super deep human factors, buttons and screens kind of work to try and get these products to perform and meet the expectations of a very, optimized workforce. What was so interesting to me, it was the only client who came to me when the market crashed and said, this is when you invest in design. This is when you work on your new products so that you're ready when the market picks up and you can take a lead position. And he was not a designer, this guy, but he really understood the role that design could have even for a company like that, right? And it was so inspiring. And that's why what you said resonates so much, particularly if we think about smaller companies. Like, this is the time to invest in designers. Is it the same design leaders? Do you need to think about design leadership and CDOs and all that other stuff the same way? Maybe not. But it is the moment to invest. It is that dynamic moment. And, for me, it's just really exciting to hear that you're still seeing that belief in design and that commitment to it, and hearing it from CEOs and folks who are not necessarily coming in predisposed. And so to me, that is really what is exciting. And the other thing that I tried to write about in this second piece is that for designers themselves, the ones who I think are trying to not just get hired, but start some of these ventures, I think they're coming in with a much more sophisticated understanding of business, product, of markets, of sort of whole varied set of dimensions for where and how you can be creative in business. And so for that reason, I think they're just going to be doing and launching much more interesting things. I mean, I had 4 or 5 years ago, a bunch of friends sold agencies to the Facebooks and Googles of this world, and a lot of them went back and started their own agency again. It's like, I'll do this again. Now I did pretty well, and now the next thing I do, I can make a little more bespoke, a little more of what I'm interested in. But it wasn't different. They weren't exploring very entrepreneurial business models. I mean, there's nothing entrepreneurial about an agency business model. It's the most conservative business model in the world, right? You get hired to do work for people. So I do think that a lot of the designers, I profiled one, Kwame in the piece, I think they're going to be also doing really interesting things, partnering with non-designers to launch things that have a strong design component, but are really bringing together a much more nuanced understanding of different ways to create value, different ways to engage markets and customers. So I mean, that part I think is super exciting, and I would just very much echo what Kate said about it.
Absolutely, and I think we're also one of the ideas that's emerging here, perhaps, is Kate, the founder that you are referencing and that you're interacting with, maybe a different background, a different demographic, maybe a different age than some of the corporate executives that are kind of pulling the strings in scaled enterprises where we're seeing some of the contraction of design programs and elimination of roles that Robert writes about. Do you see that as being maybe a really tangible sort of signal and reason for hope here?
Absolutely. And Again, what I'm seeing is it's not just make me a pretty app. I mean, they're thinking about design. Like I was talking to a woman yesterday who was running design at one of our security startups, and the CEO was like, "We're making a fundamental business shift in like we're merging two products. We have to, and remember, these are folks that are like they have to manage to their next round. They there is like real pressure. This is not Facebook hire 10 designers and wind things up and wind things down. There's like real pressure." And the CEO called the head of design and said, "I need you to visualize this for the company because nobody understands what I'm talking about." So they're using design not only to make great user experiences, they're using it to visualize, to galvanize, to bring people together. They're also using it deeply, like UX research is having a boon right now too, which I love to see going hand in hand. Folks are hiring researchers earlier. They're contracting out researchers earlier. They're thinking of design as being also just the voice of the customer and the voice of the user and the mirror in the organization as well. There's another younger woman founder who is doing some really interesting stuff with like AI and misinformation, working with government and large agencies and things like that. And she's like, "I need a designer. I need someone to like visualize for this for me. I don't understand. Like, I need somebody who can bring in some more empathy to my organization." So it's not only are they excited about design, but they get it. Like they're using us in a way that we want to be used. And it's not a lot of like, I'm going to fake an MBA so I can be at the table. It's like, no, just be you, bring your point, bring your skill set and bring your knowledge to the table. And that's what we want from you.
What I'm hearing, Kate, is that those founders they need it. That like there's a visceral need for the point of view and the guidance and the thinking of that designer and that design leader.
There's also a letting go, I think, that's happening a little bit, because I think a big piece of the success of design is that things like user research and prototyping are broad skills that companies need. And many stakeholders and many folks contribute to making that happen in a company. It's no longer ring-fenced in a design team. And I'll actually say, Kate, so I was at the Advancing Research Conference, big UX research conference 2 weeks ago in New York that Lou Rosenfeld runs. And the mood was not good. And the reason the mood wasn't good is, number one, at least when you talk to the rank and file that are doing that work, they're not seeing a lot of jobs. Maybe I'm wrong. It wasn't so much that, it was the letting go that was the problem, which is the capabilities to generate good insights, to capture them, to communicate them well, are something that is more broadly held across the company. And it can be done well and it can be done poorly. But either way, it's hard to still own that as a singular mandate. And people are really struggling with that and feeling that their skills are being diluted and their values being diluted. And it's an interesting question, right? Because you have to respect, and I work with we do a lot of user research, so I really appreciate what it takes to do it well. But you also have to appreciate that there has been a bit of a sea change, and that sea change comes with some letting go of what it is you're leading. And so what you just described, which is more future planning and visualizing different scenarios and thinking beyond product to the different layers and parts of what makes a business work and the different stakeholders and operations that a business needs to run, and thinking about that from a design perspective, it's a different problem space. And I think we're in a funny point, and I haven't written about this because these articles have been mostly focused on design leadership, but we're in a funny point where there's a letting go process, and with it, some uncertainty. On the one hand, I think some of our comments earlier, people coming in with different backgrounds, different inspiration, are facile and capable of doing different things. On the other hand, the simple job description of digital UX product person or UX researcher for a product, like those things, those might not be the sort of skills and roles that people are going to thrive in the future. And the one thing I said at the research conference, which I think is really true, I'd love your thoughts on it, is talking to some of these people, I was like, how much time do you spend driving culture change in your organization? If you think you're being hired to do research, and that means you get to go off and do it, and somebody else is doing that work, then you're not engaged in the organization fully as a designer as you should, because at the end of the day, you have to embrace and take that on. And I do think that I feel when we step away from the design leadership conversation that there is a shift, and I think it's a positive one, and it's a letting go. And I think, but it's coming with some worry and some sacrifice and a lot of impact on individuals.
Yeah, I do want to honor that because I do know of a lot of UX researchers that have been let go, and it's unfortunate. It's almost that you're saying the letting go, we've become victims of our own success. Everyone loves what we're doing so much that the rest of the organization starts to co-op it, and what we do anymore doesn't feel as unique or special. Or they just have taken us for granted, and they'll find, what would be really interesting now is that after some of these downsizes, do we see a change in how the business operates? Do we see customers drop off? Like, was design making a real difference in the organization? That's a tough question to ask.
Yeah, and how long will it take for us to get that read, to get that data in a meaningful way? That's a great provocation. Robert, you've mentioned the second of the two Fast Company articles. This was the one that was titled "Design Leaders Are in Their Reinvention Era," and you point to what you call a moment of reinvention. Then we've referenced these communities of design leaders, different forums coming together. Kate, you've been at this for many years with Google Ventures, assembling different groupings of design leaders to find each other, to share ideas, to connect. Robert, my sense from this second article is that you're seeing this as a really positive outcome of a challenging moment. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the point Kate made a little bit about territoriality. One of the things I do enjoy working more in the public sector is it's a less territorial sector. The few designer practitioners in this sector are generally pretty open to sharing. And I think it's been a little delayed, and it had to reach critical mass. And I think there is a lot of really positive sharing and alliances and learning that's happening right now for the community, both in terms of our practice, but I thought other part that I'm quite interested in terms of what makes us strong and impactful as a community and as a profession, and where and how do we stand together. And so the thing that's on my mind right now is a question of advocacy and where and how designers can assert a voice. And that could go in a lot of different directions, but there are big ethical questions. I think that we're at a tipping point in terms of, I think, a sort of fairly deterministic model of technology that's retaking hold. And there are really big questions there. And I think that there is, to Tim Brown's point, I think a lot more industry credibility sitting in that community than there used to be, a lot more knowledge, a lot more relationships. And so, what do we stand for and how do we exert a voice, and who, I've thought in the past, I was actually thinking about this based on some of our history, Doug, like in the past, there were people, whether it was Victor Papanek or Bucky Fuller or John Thackera, who would, as a singular voice, help us see the bigger idea and the bigger mission that we were on together. Not everybody doing it the same way. And I don't know if we're at a moment where a singular voice can hold that space.
I would add to that great list our late mutual friend Bill Drentel, who had that ability to just say, stop worrying about this stuff because there's a bigger idea that we all need to be aligned with and pointed toward.
Yeah, so I'm curious as to how much these communities and these platforms are creating the space for that. I'm curious how much designers, particularly at a moment, we were talking about the counterintuitive moment where the market's crashing and I have a client come up to me and say, let's invest in design. This is the exact moment to do it. And in a similar way, like we sort of have nothing to lose. At the same time, it is a precarious moment for some individuals. But nonetheless, is it a moment where it's really important to assert that voice, both from inside companies and certainly talking to folks who are feeling that those dynamics and trying to shape them inside companies as well as from the outside. And to me, it's a really interesting question. And I do think, coming back to your point, that wasn't true in 2001 when the dot-com crashed. We didn't have the credibility to assert much voice in the market and to bring those values forward as a really anchoring idea. And I think that potential is here, and that's another thing I'm pretty excited and optimistic about.
Looking forward and extending this idea of community, what's the opportunity there that you see for design leaders, designers, wherever they are in their career, to come together in new ways? What's the potential there?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of phases of community, right? There's the like, oh, we're all similar. Let's get together and let's talk, and it slowly grows from that, right? There's just the connection, the helping of one another. And then what I've observed, and Robert, you've probably seen this, and it probably goes across many places, then eventually that group kind of looks at one another and says, well, what do we stand for? What are we going to do with this? Like, let's actually, instead of just sitting around and talking, like, let's actually do something together. And I'm hopeful that we're kind of getting towards that place, whether it's, Doug, when you were at our retreat, I think there was discussion there. It was just post-election, and everybody was kind of thinking, my God, like, we designed these things that like didn't do a lot of good in the world. And we, not only did we kind of not see it coming, but we have been empowered to do something if we had see it coming. And we talked, the path for architecture should, where you have to take these classes and get certified, and there's governing bodies there. Should there be the same for UX? Like, that's the same path of conversation. There's the other path is just advocating more and sharing more. So it's interesting. I'm excited that more people are getting together and sharing these perspectives. I hope that it'd be fun if some of these groups start to join together, so we're not just echo chambers, and see what happens next, like where those new voices come from. And if the groups start to form to have a real cause behind them.
Yeah, a purpose. Yeah, I like the way you tracked that, Kate, that the coming together is, it's not the point. It's not what's special. It's not what's really needed, to be honest. And that when we can come together and do so with purpose and do so with a, pointed in an intentional direction, that can be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I'm taking a group probably to Savannah College of Art and Design when I went to SCAD, and they're just a school right now that's like really into experimenting and trying to make sure that like the designers that they're graduating are ready for whatever's happening. They just did an AI summit where we all talked about AI, its effects on design education, but bringing together a group of execs down there to talk about curriculum. It's like, okay, let's like do something together and meet with the professors, meet with the students, hear their fears, their hopes, and try to have some impact on curriculum to start, if we can't have impact at the bigger companies, maybe it's with the students and then the earlier stage companies.
Oh, that's encouraging. That's great to hear. Robert, any other thoughts on the community theme or anything that Kate just went through?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're not coming into an echo chamber. There are strong alliances and voices out there talking about responsible tech, talking about ethics, digital democracy. Like, there are very strong voices. And, I feel like there's great potential for designers to be part of that. And that's the piece to me, having worked a bit with Meteor Network and some of the institutions that are really, I think, trying to hold that ground. I think it is so pressing, and it is not just a U.S. problem. I'm going to be in India in 2 weeks. I have a design team there. The things going on with the Modi government and digital platforms are really concerning, and it's happening in so many parts of the world. So I do think there's a rallying point, and I am hoping that both designers, but other, kind of folks who hold power in the industry will kind of find a common voice, and that will be advocating alongside other institutions and organizations and figuring out how to drive change in a way that I feel like the technology community at least continues to sort of, I think, ring fence a bit too much in terms of like what the ideas and the openness. It's funny because we're talking about openness, we're talking about working with users, we're talking about openness on one level, and then on another level, like a very kind of closed environment and threatened a bit when it comes to broader questions of policy and advocacy. So I'm curious, I'm a rabble rouser and a troublemaker, as these articles, I think, communicate. So we'll see. But I think there are some really smart people who've been through so many cycles inside companies who are hopefully, ready to find their voice a little more on stuff like this.
We are, surprisingly to me, very near the end of our time here. Kate, any final words that we haven't gotten to, or any thoughts to kind of summarize our discussion here?
No, it's just been fun, Robert, to see on how many ways that we actually are doing very similar work, like where you're out pioneering in other places. I think you're doing a much more difficult job, as you were saying, pioneering where there is no design in the room. But I love that you're truly like pushing design forward in ways that, like, it's not about just growing your team in a bigger company or pushing for, design to report to the CEO or things like that, like things that sometimes I think we can get a little precious about, but really thinking about the design, it's the difference design can make and the social impact it can have. And I'm very encouraged by that. And then I'm also encouraged by what I'm seeing in the startup ecosystem with these young founders with big ideas and bringing design in early. So I think I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful. And then if you also put together kind of these communities that are starting to form, we're at a really interesting point, and I'm excited to see what happens.
That's all for this episode of This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. Special thanks to Scott Leach of Brandspeak Communications for his production assistance, and to Graham Barton for his original theme music. I'd love for you to help me grow the audience for this podcast by liking and following it on your favorite podcast platform. And I'd also love your help finding great design leaders for future episodes of the show. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn with your ideas. You can find out more about my work as a design leader on my website, dougpowell.design. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.